6 to 8. And here we're really going to go by couplets because the intent is to have people be able to read entire the entire couplet one, meaning the top number one and the bottom number one, and compare them. So it's going to be a little bit awkward, but by way of explanation, we're going to gray out those number twos for right now and just look at the number ones. And then that takes us to here. Now, so those twos are still there, but we're going to ignore them because we just want to compare number one versus the other number one. And what you see in the first one is that plants with stems often growing upright, but also spreading flat and on the substrate. So let's just deal with a growing upright. That's another word for acrocarpus. You may remember that from the last time we had a meeting. And there's the definition of acrocarpus out of the big green book, with a gametophyte producing the sporophytes at the end of the stem or main branch. Most acrocarpus mosses grow erect in tufts, and they are not or only sparsely branched like that. So those are two acrocarps. The one on the left is not branched at all. And the one on the right is to kind of show you that sparsely branched can be stretched a little bit. That you can see there's a main stem there with 4 branches on it. So sometimes acrocarps are branched, but they're pretty much always upright like that. The next thing we're going to talk about is in that first number one, spreading flat on the substrate. That's a pleurocarp. You heard that last week or last month also. And there the sporophytes are produced laterally on short, usually specialized. And moss stems themselves are prostrate. And they look like that. And if you look at those, you can see that the branches are standing up, but the stems are lying down on the ground. And in fact, not even all the branches are standing up. Now, can you see my mouse there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a sporophyte, goes all the way back down to a tiny little, at least I think it does. I don't have this picture blown up, but I think it was this tiny little patch of leaves down here, and it's attached pretty much almost directly to the stem. And that's pretty typical of pleurocarps. So that brings us to the next number one, which is plants strap-shaped or ribbon-like. And you saw up at the top in this other number one that not thalloid, meaning not strap-shaped or ribbon. So thalloid looks like that. Um, Here's a thallus right here. Whoops, got to back up. There's a thallus right here. And it does have a midline with some things, some features on it, but that's the thallus right there. And it doesn't have a midrib, doesn't have an on, doesn't have a costa. So that gets us out of number one. So there we had to make, if we were in the first number one and we came up with something that fit that, then we would be on this couplet number two. And we'll start at the top this time. Leaves be arranged spirally around the stem. And we'll get to this butt C physidens later. The leaves rarely round, never lobed or deeply incised, a midrib often present, capsules usually opening, etc. So let's just deal with the spirally around the stem. There's an acrocarp, and I don't know how well this shows on your screens, but I picked this shot because this is pretty tightly wound leaves here. And if you follow them around, you'll see that the leaf and back is always overlapped by the left side of the one in front, left side of the one in front, and so on. So those are spirally wrapped around the stem. I don't think you need to put it under a microscope and watch for that so much as just get a feel for what it looks like. There's a slightly different acrocarp over here on the right in the same photo, and it looks about the same. So yeah, many of them look a lot alike. The second part, number two, the first number two is the leaves rarely round, never lobed or deeply incised, and etc. So they look like leaves. I mean, pretty much what we consider leaves. You can see the midrib down the middle, or the costa, if you want to call it that. there's no deep incisions in the leaves, and they're usually not round. Oh, the exception, but see Physidens. That was in the first number two, remember? So there's Physidens, but see Physidens. Um, this one, this this picture was taken when this plant was squashed between a slide and a slipcover. So yeah, it would be flat, but you know what? It looked exactly the same before I squashed it between the slide and the slipcover. And you can see that this is a moss. It has a midrib here or a costa. Um, Physidens also has this other unique feature. The leaves are what they call vaginate. There's a second part of the leaf here that's double and kind of wraps around the stem. And you can see it's a little darker in the photos. So ignore these. These are bubbles, air bubbles. But that is a vaginate lamina. Here's another one down here. Here's a little one down here, and even a little tiny one down here. So that's what Physidens looks like. If it's one of those exceptions. You don't want it stuck in the back of your head thinking, oh, what does that mean? In the second number two, we're talking about leaves arranged in two opposing ranks. Well, what does that mean? So there's a really good example out of the Flora, leaves in two opposing ranks. And then we, again, in two opposing ranks, what does that mean? There's one rank of leaves right there. There's a second rank of leaves. And then sometimes there's a third rank on the underside of the shoot. And there's the way the shoot would look under your microscope. Um, but that right there is an underleaf. Beneath, it's on the underside. It's on the underside of the plant. They don't all look like that, but they frequently look pretty different from the other leaves. And I just bounced that little thing in there to show that you can see that on this too. And there's also an underleaf showing through the leaf there, and there may even be one there, I'm not sure. So it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what you're looking for with ranks of leaves and underleaves, etc.
So an underleaf is just a smaller leaf. It's not a part of the existing leaf.
It's
What?
not, yeah, and you can't really tell that. Let me back off a little bit. Yeah, you can't really tell that, right? I mean, you have to you have to focus. So this this image was probably shot with photo stacking, so everything's in focus. But when it's under your microscope, you can move your focus up and down, and that upper leaf, if it's on the bottom, may come into focus last. If it's on the top, it'll come into focus first. And so you have to depend a lot on focusing up and down to figure out what you're looking at in the microscope you're looking through. Then in the second lead here, number two, leaves arranged in two opposing ranks again. Third rank. We still had a little bit of stuff undiscussed. What do lobes mean? So again, the same picture. And there's one leaf, two lobes. Okay, a single leaf with two lobes. Deeply incised, what does that mean? There. So these leaves are so deeply incised, they all look like a bunch of filaments. But they occur on this plant in groups of the leaves are usually parted into four lobes. So you can kind of count four. This is about the only one you can count that in. There's because it looks like there's two here, maybe there is, but here you can actually count all four right there. Well, that's deeply incised. But over here on the left, deeply incised would mean it's just cut, most of the way down to the stem like that. So that gets you to, are we talking about a moss or are we talking about a liverwort? And I'm going to go with the mosses because Barbara's going to talk about liverworts a little bit. And I need to do a little less explanation here because it just so happens that this indented key, the couplets fall out in pairs every time. The ones are with the ones, the twos are always with the twos, threes, fours. So that'll make it a little bit easier to follow what I'm doing here. Leaf cells arranged, first number one, leaf cells arranged in a network of narrow green cells alternating with large hyaline cells. What does that look like? Um, it looks like that. In the big green book, I think that's blue because it was stained. I made it green so you, because if you haven't stained it, it's going to look green. The big heavy green lines you're seeing here, those are not cell walls. Those are cells. And so that's a cell there and that's a cell there. And in between are these other cells. And these little things in here that look like little barrel staves, they're not cell walls either. They're fibrils. And this particular sphagnum has fibrils in it. So when you're talking about a network of narrow green cells, that's these guys alternating with large hyaline cells. That's these guys. And the plant's branches are arranged in radiate clusters toward the apex of the stem, and the stem's terminated by a head-like cluster of short branches. Excuse me. That's what that looks like. So you can kind of see a radiate cluster here. There's several branches coming off right there. And then there's this head-like cluster, just kind of this, it looks like a palm tree to me, right there at the top. I think the only sphagnums I've seen came in a packet. So I don't know, but I think they're fairly obvious if you actually pick one up and look at it. So that got us into the sphagnum group. We've peeled that off as the first number two, and that leaves everything else. So let's go to the everything else part of the couplet. Oh, I'm sorry, we're still up here with leaves, definitely disticus arrangement, attached in two obvious rows on opposite sides of the stem. You might remember this discussion from last month also, because these leaves are clearly on opposite sides of the stem. You can, that's one's on the bottom, one's on the top, one's on the top, one's on the bottom, just like, and they're not necessarily opposite, but they are on opposite sides of the stem. The other thing that looks kind of like that is called complanate. They're also flattened, but they may look like this. That one's not. This is actually a good example to show because sometimes it's not real obvious they're flattened. You have to kind of, when you get asked the question in the key, you need to take a really good look. And maybe you need to look at it real closely before you put it under a slip cover and don't know whether it was flat because of that or because it really is flat. Now I think we're up to the second number two, stems with leaves attached all around the stem, not appearing disticus or complanate foliate. And you've seen that. The slide on the left, you've already seen. That's an acrocarp, and the one on the right is a pleurocarp. uh, and the one on the right, you'll notice some of the leaves in this one are kind of all pointed to one side, but they're still originating from all around the stem. These they look kind of round because they probably are more or less round. This is a plant where sometimes the leaves are kind of hanging on one side, which is called homomalus. And sometimes it looks homomalus and sometimes it looks more round like this. You have to kind of look for it. By the way, that got us down to the first number two, you see, got us into group A. So two, that's everything else because this is a stair-step key in this case. Uh, Everything else gets us to three. So now we want to compare leaves with lamellae or filaments on the adaxial upper surface of the costa. That's going to be group B if that's true. And what's that going to look like? It looks like this. So this is a cross section from the Heliflora of a leaf with lamellae. And so what you're seeing the lamellae here and the leaf itself here, the lamina of the leaf. So if I point those out, the lamellae in the cross section on the left look like that. But when you see them in plan view, just looking at them under your stereoscope, they may look like that. In fact, let me back that off again. See how that looks like two leaves on the right I'm talking about. It looks like two leaves, one stacked on top of the other. And that happens when you're peeling leaves off of mosses. If you're up toward the apex of the stem, you may get leaves stacked. So you may need a cross section to know what's going on. But there's the lamellae, and the black arrows there are pointing out the leaf lamina itself. Or filaments. So this was lamellae or filaments. And here's another one where I have a couple of illustrations because I think this can actually be confusing. If you look at this plant on the upper left, the leaf looks like it's full of algae. It's not. It's loaded with these long uh, filaments coming off the costa. If you cut a cross section of it, it looks like the one on the bottom. Those are the same plant.
Wow.
Now, if the first time you've ever seen one, you see that, you'll think, "Oh, I'll know that again." Well, a little word of caution: look on the right because these also have filaments. That one on the right looks like it may have a little bit of moss or algae, I mean, on the costa, but it doesn't. It actually has these little short filaments, and not very many of them. The filaments only occur from right here near the apex down to about there. And if you don't cut a cross section between there and there, you might not even see them. Don't give up hope if you don't like the idea of cutting cross sections. You can also see them you can also see them under probably a stereoscope. These two shots were done under a compound scope. But on the left, I hope this shows up on your screen, but you can see these filaments lying down here. There's one. And here's another filament right here. These are all been squashed down under the slip cover, and that's what they look like lying down. On the right are those little short ones. They're too short to be dumped over by the being squeezed by the slip cover. So what you're looking at is they're pointed straight up at you, and all you're looking at is the very apical cell on each one of those filaments, which is maybe only 3 or 4 cells long. So either of those would get you in, whoops, sorry, back up, would get you in group B. And that leaves 3, everything else again. And everything else, it gets you down to the fourth, the couplet with the 4s in it. Again, you've actually seen this, so we won't spend a lot of time on it. But again, we're talking about to get into group C or group D, you just need to know is an acrocarp or is it a pleurocarp? Like that. And I just throw the illustrations in there again so they will remind you what you saw on the slide before. And that's the whole show. If I think if people thought this was useful, it might be worth doing for some of the subkeys and higher up. Because like I said, the goal here is to get people into at least into a family where you have some confidence that, oh yeah, this is a Podiaceae or this is a Bryophytes or whatever. And if you can get there with some confidence, then you don't feel so terrible about spending a lot of time on the moss, trying to decide between this and that. So I hope that's helpful. And that's it.